Sorry your wife cooked dinner tonight. It's a little boring. I know. Any advice on how I can improve?
This is a common scenario when being served food from someone who knows you're a chef. Well, they do apologize, but they don't always ask for advice. But they should. The answer isn't scary. In fact, it is pretty straightforward and incredibly simple. If you've managed to feed yourself with a few basic meals, you really don't need to start with learning fancy knife cuts or the 1,000 ways to cook an egg. All you really need to know to dial your cooking from basic to competent is sauce making.
All right, I said what you wanted me to. I cannot believe you try to sully my good name and then you try to be cheap on top of it.
In the 1800s, French chefs began proposing classifications of grande sauces, or mother sauces, with their derivatives being called daughter sauces. The most famous of those classifications came from Auguste Escoffier, who popularized French cooking during his time. His list includes bechamel, a milk and roux sauce, which become a mornay with the addition of cheese, or a soubise with only the addition of a sweated onion. Or there's espagnole, a sauce of brown stock with a brown roux. When you include white wine, shallots, lemon, and tarragon, it becomes a chateaubriand. Or a chasseur sauce if you were to add shallots and mushrooms instead. Then there is tomato, which is tomatoes and mirepoix cooked with a roux. This sauce can become a bolognese when ground meat, oregano, and red wine are added, not to be confused with marinara, which is made with oregano, garlic, and basil. Next is the classic velouté, which is just any stock with a roux. When brown stock is used along with egg yolk, cream, and lemon, you get allemande sauce. If using fish stock with lemon juice, shallots, white wine, and parsley, you'll have Bercy sauce. Lastly, though somewhat debated, is hollandaise, which is an emulsified sauce of cooked butter and egg. Once whipped cream is folded into it, it becomes a mousseline. One could also make a Bavaroise sauce by adding cream, horseradish, and thyme.
I thought you said incredibly simple. How do you expect anyone to remember all that?
Yeah, I'll be honest, that is just a little too much even for me. Each one of these sauces has even more derivatives, and truthfully, I haven't really used any of them since culinary school over a decade ago. For me, they're just a little too French, except for the allemande, which is technically a German derivative. Now don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with any of those sauces, except the Bavarois because of the horseradish. Ugh. I just don't think memorizing the French mother sauces is a practical way for the home cook to step up their game. I propose a different classification instead, one not based on the popular sauces of 200 years ago. I like to classify sauces by their method of thickening: starch, tempering, reduction, emulsion, puree, plus.
Strep?
Now I have to change the order.
Strep. Strep.
Today we'll focus on starch-thickened sauces. I think they're the most versatile for how simple they are to master. The most common starch method is the use of a roux, which is a mixture of equal parts butter and flour by weight that is cooked to get rid of the raw cereal taste.
Cereal taste?
Cereal is a classification for grains such as barley, quinoa, amaranth, and rye. Anyway, cooking a roux for a few minutes will get you a blonde roux. Cooking a few minutes more will get you a brown roux, and yet a few more will get a brick roux, with varying grades in between, and the darker the color, the richer the flavor. One thing to note, however, is that the darker you cook a roux, the less thickening power it will have. Since I like my richer sauces a little thinner, I don't increase the amount even when making a brown roux. Now let's take a look at the technique of how to make a roux, then use it to make a simple chicken gravy. We begin by adding our butter to a saucier or saucepan over medium-high heat, melting it and allowing the milk solids to begin to cook out. You can tell you've reached that stage when the butter stops foaming.
Do you have to use butter? Do we even need to use fat?
Well, the fat is needed to coat the individual starch granules. This allows the flour to disperse in the sauce evenly before thickening can take place. Otherwise, it would clump together. You could technically use a different fat and not have to wait for foaming, but butter is traditional and it tastes good. Though you could also use rendered fat from cooking meat like sausage, which is how you make a traditional sawmill gravy to put over biscuits. But that's another...
Ooh, yeah. I'd pour some of that over your biscuits. I don't really understand how the flour thickens anything though.
The flour granules are made up of starch molecules that, when in the presence of heat and moisture, they unravel to bind the liquid in the sauce, creating loose entanglements with each other.
Well, how do you know how much roux you need?
The golden ratio of roux to liquid is roughly 1 to 10. In other words, 3 ounces of roux to thicken 1 quart or 32 ounces, or 100 grams to 1 liter. I always weigh my flour, but a third of a cup weighs about 1.5 ounces, as does 3 tablespoons of butter. That will get you the 3 ounces of roux you'll need. When you add your liquid, in this case chicken stock, I actually like to only add a third of it to start. I find it's easier to whisk with less liquid to prevent it from sloshing out of the pan before adding the rest of the stock. Then it's just a matter of bringing the whole thing to a boil while gently whisking.
Well, how do you tell when it's done?
You can tell a sauce is done when it reaches what is called nappe, which basically means when you dip a spoon in it and run your finger down the back, the sauce will cling to the spoon with a distinct line where your finger traced. This might seem too thin, but remember, the sauce will thicken as it cools when it is being served. Just like when cooking eggs, done in the pan means overdone on the plate.
Well, what if you decide it's still too thin?
For that, all we'll need to do is add some Burman.
More French?
It just means kneaded butter. It is essentially a roux with the same ratio of butter and flour, but instead of cooking it, we knead them together either by hand or in a food processor. Once thoroughly combined, we roll into little M&M sized balls and chill it. I like to keep some in a deli cup in the freezer to have on hand just in case.
Why do we chill it?
There's a general rule that you never add hot liquid to a hot roux. The reason for this is to prevent the starches from coagulating before they can unravel, which causes it to clump up in your sauce. Plus, adding too hot components would result in a lot of splattering. Technically, you could make a roux in advance, chill it, and stir it into your simmering stock, which is exactly how we use a beurre marnier. I should note that beurre marniers should be used sparingly, as the flour won't really have a chance to cook, and too much will affect the flavor of your sauce. It is great when you need a small boost of thickening though, like this beef gravy that was a little on the runny side. In culinary school, I actually had an instructor that spoke with admiration of a chef he worked for that was known for walking through the kitchen kneading beurre marnier in his hands and adding it as needed to the various sauces the cooks were preparing. A few years later, I found myself leading that very same chef on a line at a restaurant.
So, is a roux the only way to thicken a sauce with starch? Like just about every one of those sauces from the 1800s you mentioned earlier?
Not quite. Another simple and popular starch for sauce making is cornstarch. This one comes in the form of a slurry. Simply take 1 part of cornstarch and 2 parts water. The ratio of cornstarch is roughly 1 to 30, or 1 ounce slurry to thicken 1 quart of liquid, that's 32 ounces, or about 33 grams to 1 liter. All you need to do to prepare your slurry is put the cornstarch in a sealed container with a bit of water and shake to combine just before adding to your simmering cooking liquid.
Shaken, not stirred.
I find shaking it disperses the starch much easier than trying to stir it in. Also, cornstarch tends to settle quickly, which is why I like to make it just before I'm ready to use it. When cornstarch does settle, you get something like this at the bottom of your container.
So, this one you can't make ahead.
Actually, you can. This method is really only practical if you plan on using a lot of slurry within a week or two though, since a slurry is so simple. I'll make some to demonstrate real quick anyway. I have right here a quart of water divided into 2 pints. In this deli cup, I have 1 ounce of cornstarch, and this one has 8 ounces. Come with me to the stovetop and I'll show you how this works. I could combine the cornstarch and water now and bring it to a boil while whisking, but in most applications, you'd be thickening an already simmering liquid. So for demonstration purposes, that's exactly how I'll bring this make-ahead slurry together. So I'll pour out about 2 ounces of the water to my 1 ounce of cornstarch and set that aside until the remainder comes up to a boil. I will be adding another pint of water later for a total of 1 quart. Now I can lid up and shake to combine before pouring into the simmering liquid, then bring it all to a boil while gently whisking before killing the heat. After the mixture is cooled for a few minutes, I'm going to take the remaining pint of water and combine it with the 8 ounces of cornstarch. I'll shake to combine this one as well, and immediately pour it into the cooked slurry mixture and whisk vigorously until it's smooth. Now we have 8 ounces of unactivated cornstarch suspended in 32 ounces of activated slurry water. That means that every 4 ounces of the mixture, in other words half a cup, will contain 1 ounce of cornstarch, enough to thicken another 32 ounces of liquid. You can keep this in the fridge for a few weeks, and even if it does settle a bit, a quick stir will easily bring it all back together. Now that we have our slurry, let's make something tasty with it. This is just a basic orange sauce that even the kids love. It is also really quick to whip up since slurries are so simple.
Well, if they're so simple, why make a roux at all versus a slurry?
Well, roux are great not only for thickening but adding flavor. Slurries don't impart any distinguishable flavor, which can be a good thing, and they make for a smoother, glossier sauce.
Guess a slurry is also your only option if you can't have wheat.
Well, there are a few other starches you can consider for roux and slurries. Rice flour can be used in both, although it doesn't really brown the same way as flour, and a dark color on it will make the sauce taste burnt. The ratios will be basically the same and will result in a luxuriously velvety sauce. Potato starch and arrowroot both work great as well, but I can't say I reach for those very often. And would you look at that? 3 simple techniques that can yield hundreds of recipes for countless meals. Equipped as you are now, the sky's the limit when it comes to simple sauces you can make at home. Hey, where's my food?
I already made your dinner.
Oh, yeah.